Well, welcome everyone joining us today for an Exploration Quarterly Field Artist interview is Michael Boardman. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Did I say your name right, first
You
off?
did, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Boardman, just like it looks.
Okay. Well, Michael, where are you right now?
I'm in North Yarmouth, Maine, which is a southern Maine, kind of in between Portland and Freeport.
Is that where you're from?
I grew up in coastal Maine, Blue Hill, which is very close to Acadia National Park. Um, and we moved to Maine. I'm not a real Mainer because we moved here when I was 7 years old. So before that, I
Oh, it's
lived
close.
outside of New York City.
Well, you're lucky then. Growing up outside Acadia is probably pretty significant for your development as a naturalist.
It
Tell us,
was.
tell
It
us a
was
little bit
great to
about that,
have.
maybe.
Oh, it's just great to have your background be this beautiful landscape with lots of rocks and seashore and wildlife. We spent a fair bit of time exploring around Acadia, but my favorite place is actually just north of Acadia, this part of the park called Schoodic, which is a peninsula that sticks out above Acadia, Mount Desert Island, which is where Acadia is on. And it's much less traveled, and it's got beautiful rock formations and lots of birds and lots of lichen and moss and great hikes. And it's a beautiful spot. That's the place I recommend for people to go if they go up to Acadia, because in the summer, like most national parks, like Bar Harbor and Acadia, it gets pretty crowded.
Well, that's great advice. Sounds beautiful.
Yeah,
And did you spend quite a bit of time outdoors as a kid? And when did you start drawing things?
I did. I was probably drawing at a very young age. Um, I think my parents saved sketches from like second and third grade of drawing from National Geographic
Mhm.
or whatever, drawing critters. And yeah, I grew up in the age where when you were a kid, your parents kicked you out of the house and said, "Go entertain yourself for a while,"
Yep.
which was awesome. And then when we moved to Maine, we had almost 100 acres of land, fields and forest, and old farmhouse. So that was when we weren't gardening. Um, or doing some chores, we just explored in the trails and had a great time. I was very into amphibians and reptiles at that point, and there were a few vernal pools and spots where I could look for salamanders and frogs and rock walls for snakes and stuff like that.
Ah, that sounds fantastic. And did you go into art early on as a young adult? How did that come about?
So it was pretty much the one thing I was good at. I was not good at much else. Sports were not in my repertoire. Um, at high school, I was kind of an awkward kid, so I could draw and I did it well, and it was a way to sort of retreat into my world. And so I kind of knew that was going to be my path. I didn't really understand um, all the patching and putting together you have to do to have a life as a creative artist. I'm sure other people who do that are aware of that scenario.
Yeah, I think
Um,
there's probably some people nodding out there. Oh yeah.
yeah, cobbled together lifestyle.
Yeah.
But it's fun, and I get to do mostly what I want to do, which is really nice. Um,
That's wonderful. Well, speaking of that, I think I found your work when I was living in Alaska. We had a few years where we just loved it. We were in Fairbanks, and I saw you were at the on the North Slope during that time as an artist in residence. I think that's when I started seeing your work. How did that come about? And was that your first artist in residence?
I had done a few previous to that, and they all sort of led up to that one. So I know, let's reel back to 2009 or 2008. I was a graphic artist. I was trying to sort of be more of a fine artist, but I have a t-shirt business that I did. I basically run myself. We design and do t-shirts for natural history museums and nature shops with a line of my artwork on them. So that had can kind of consumed my life for a long time. And I was like, all right, I want to get away from the screen and I want to go outside and I want to do more exploratory art. And about that same time, a good friend of mine mentioned that she had just been the artist in residence in Baxter State Park, which is Mount Katahdin in Maine, and they had just started a residency program. And that she's like, you should apply for this. I was like, yikes, I've never done anything like that. She and I had actually done a class up in Baxter State Park a few years previous, a watercolor class, sort of introductory. So I had a little bit of things to show, and I applied for that residency, and to my great surprise, I got it. Um, and I got to spend 2 weeks in Baxter State Park being an exploratory artist with a field sketchbook and outside and no, cell phone contact or anything. So that really kind of turned me on to um, exploring my world and sort of pushing my artwork in that way and trying to be experiential and trying to sort of let things happen as I wandered outside. It's, oh, that looks cool. I want to sit and draw that. I didn't really have a schedule. And that led to doing something at Acadia National Park a couple years later, another artist residency. And then a few years after that, I applied to this great program called Voices of the Wilderness, which is in
Oh,
Alaska.
yes, I've heard of
And
that.
it's fantastic. It's 10 to 12 different wildlife or wilderness areas in Alaska, whether it be national park or national wildlife refuge or forest lands. And they pair you with rangers or people from the park who are doing specific things, and you sort of see the park through their eyes for the people that are protecting it and are enabling it to continue. So I applied for that in Glacier Bay, Alaska, and I got that, which I was really shocked at, but really pleased because in 1994, my wife and I had kayaked for a week in Glacier Bay, Alaska, and I asked her to marry me, and she happily said
Oh,
yes. So,
that's fantastic.
so it had this place had a special connection for me to go back to, and that was really great because I got to sort of pair with all kinds of different wildlife and other scientists doing work in Glacier Bay, which is an amazing chunk of biodiversity in Southeast Alaska.
Yes, it is.
It's
I mean,
incredible.
hard
So
to
just like,
describe. That's why I think the art is such a good way to convey what the incredible nature is in that region. I mean, all of Alaska for sure, but
yeah,
Glacier Bay is pretty spectacular.
it was very spectacular. So it was really cool. We got to go out with whale biologists and seabird biologists and doing a hydrology study of the whole bay itself. So it was like a little of this and a little of that. So that was really neat.
Tell us
Um,
about how did as a with your sketchbook, your field notebook, tell us a little bit about how you captured some of that. That sounds pretty difficult, challenging, I should say.
well, it was, but there's also so I can just give you an example. The first day I flew into Juneau, got the plane up to Gustavus, and they picked me up and brought me to the park. Um, Glacier Bay is this huge 60-mile like fjord, basically two finger fjord, and most of the park stuff is at the head of that fjord in a town called Gustavus. Excuse me. So I was camping out. I was still on East Coast time, so I woke up bright and early at 4 a.m., ready to go. It's like, oh, well, it's 4 a.m., but it's Alaska, in June or July. It was July at that point, I think. So it's light out at 4 a.m. So I just packed my stuff up and sort of walked down to the edge of the little bay that we were on. And it's like you could see the mountains. It was a clear, beautiful day. I started sketching. Um, Sitting on a rock, I think. This was early on. And within like a few minutes, some sea otters were sort of over off to the side in the seaweed doing their thing. So I sketched those, and there were some oyster catchers right on the beach that walked by. So I did little sketches of those guys and just sitting quietly. And all of a sudden, these sea lions came into the bay. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then within like 10 minutes, I started hearing that sort of um, that cetacean breath, that
Yeah.
I looked up and two orcas had come into the bay. And all this happened
Wow.
in the 20 minutes I decided to sit and do drawing in this one little spot. And I was all by myself in the early morning. I was like, oh my God, this is just like incredible. And I really feel like I tell this story when I teach some nature journaling stuff because when you stop to draw and when you stop to be part of the landscape, you become part of, you're focused on something that isn't you're focused on things around you, but you're not like actively looking for things. You're sort of focused on one. it's meditative, and I think you become more a part of the landscape when you do that, and then other creatures react to you as part of the landscape rather than a person with a camera or a pair of binoculars trying to see what they're doing. So
I
I find that
completely
all kinds of
agree.
cool things happen when you're just being quiet and sketching in one spot.
And you notice things more, much more than if you are pursuing rather than just being part.
Yeah.
That's a good point. It's really tempting to, want to put some miles under you and oh, what's over there? And what birds can I see? But if you're just quietly sitting, I think some people call that a sit spot,
Yeah.
um, is the best way. And sometimes 20, 30 minutes or even an hour can go by and not much is happening. I don't think everyone has exactly what you have.
No. No, I got lucky with that one. That was that,
Yeah.
but no,
Did
it's
that sort of hook you on even more on the whole experience?
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so after that, you were up in the North Slope?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that residency led to another Voices of the Wilderness residency, which was an Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Um, and it was really interesting that it's a place I'd always wanted to explore. I was been very interested in conservation and wildlife and wilderness areas since I was young. And you say that name, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and it's people know that that's a place that's been fought over politically for a long time. And it's this last huge chunk of 19 million acres of protected land so far in the northeast part of Alaska. It's as big as the state of Maine, which is just mind-blowing to me.
It
But
is.
there's all kinds of different ecosystems that are there. There's all kinds of different, it's the last chunk of area that has all these original animals from pretty much before people inhabited the place. It's got caribou and muskox and polar bear and grizzly bear and wolves and all the birds and everything else. So it's a really fascinating place. And it's cool because I got that residency because I had done other residencies in wilderness areas. I had done something in Alaska at Glacier Bay, so I already had some Alaska experience. And I had become somewhat of a bird nerd at that point, and they were looking specifically for a artist from the lower 48 who could bring back the story of the migratory birds, who had Alaska experience and who was interested in birds. And I was like, I hit all the buttons right. It was just timing more than anything else. I don't think, it was, I can't say it's luck. Maybe the universe just wanted me to go up there, but all these sort of things clicked. Do you know who George Schaller is?
Yes.
So, so
So
George
one of
Schaller
the
has
greatest biologists, conservation leaders on the planet. I think,
indeed.
yeah, my husband and I definitely patterned our lives. I should say we were inspired by George Schaller.
Yes. And me too. So I had for a couple years before I got that residency, I had a picture of George Schaller as a 20-something-year-old. He did one of the original explorations of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to trying to figure out how they could make it into a protected area with Olas and Marty Muri and a few other people.
Hey,
And there's this great picture of him sitting on a bluff looking out on these mountains. And I made that my screensaver on my computer. And, several years later, I got to
there you
not
are.
the exact same spot, but I was doing that. And I wrote him a letter. And I said, you've inspired me. I'm going up to the Arctic. I just wanted to let you know. And he wrote me a handwritten letter back.
Oh my gosh.
He's 90 something years old now. And so that was just to me. I have that letter on my desk as inspiration. It's just great.
Wow, that and to think though that here we are still having to fight for the Arctic National Wildlife
Yeah.
Refuge.
Yeah.
People hear, oh, 19 million acres, do we really need all that open space where, we are not using anything, but it's an incredibly important area for not just the megafauna that we all kind of gravitate to, the
Yeah.
incredible caribou herds that are being fragmented more and more and more, that we're losing the vast migratory patterns that mimic what's in Africa in terms of
Yeah.
movement, the wolves, the predators, grizzly bears, but the birds we forget about. And why tell us a little about that, why the bird migration is so critical, why it's important for that.
So this space, this space, the Arctic coastal plain, which is a big flat area. There's this chunk of about 20 miles of land between the end of the Brooks Range and where the Arctic Ocean, the Beaufort Sea hits. Um, and what happens is this area, all the snow and stuff melts, and the permafrost fracturing and stuff makes all these tundra pools. So it's a really wet, sort of wetland habitat, and it's got 24-hour daylight, and it's basically got no humans. People, some researchers are there doing stuff. Occasionally, rafters might come down one of the rivers, but it's basically undisturbed. So the birds have this place where they go. They have all the resources they need. They can feed 24/7 because it's daylight. And these huge tundra ponds spew out hordes and hordes of mosquitoes and other insects that the birds need to survive. So they time this so they fly up there, they get their territory sorted out, lay the eggs, and when the eggs hatch, they've got it timed so the bugs are just hatching as the eggs hatch. And then the chicks, who are mostly precocial, which means once they hatch out of the egg, they're pretty much ready to go. The parents watch them for a little while, but then they're sort of on off the tundra doing their thing. And then there's a huge food source for them.
Yeah.
So it's got all these things that sort of line up, and it's amazing. You know, once the parents who have expended huge amount, a lot of these birds migrate from like South America, southern South America. Some of them, it's just incredible. Shorebirds mostly is what I'm talking
I was
about. Or,
just going to ask, and yes, I'm
yeah,
aware
golden plovers and
we have
semi-pollinated
terns
sandpipers and
in
stuff.
Mexico that head up there. It's pretty astonishing, and the
It's
numbers. We're talking
incredible.
millions upon millions of birds.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just fascinating. So I got to do my artist residency was working with a group of ornithologists studying the nesting success of this chunk of tundra and 2 mile square tundra, chunk of tundra off the Canning River. Um, and sort of as a baseline for how these birds are doing without any sort of industrial application there. So you try to see
It's an
what,
important
if
baseline.
something happens there that they can say, well, look at how much the birds are dropping and, nesting success or whatever.
Yes, that's the baseline is what's important. So, what tell us about a typical day working as a field artist in a science camp on the North Slope?
Um, it was, well, the first thing I'll say is that I got a dose of um, waiting to fly out because Arctic weather is pretty sketchy. So I got to sit in the Fish and Wildlife Service depot, plane depot, waiting with all the pilots, and they're like, we're not going to go today." They started telling bear stories, and most of the bear stories ended up with, "And he was dragged out of the tent by his feet, and we never saw him again." I was like, "Oh, awesome!" So I get to the field camp, and it's a couple weather huts, weather ports, which are big domed sort of semi-permanent structures. But then everybody else is camping out in tents, surrounded by a solar-powered bear fence. And they point me to my tent, which happens to be right on the edge of the solar-powered bear fence. Like, oh, I guess I'm the most expendable member of this group. But it was awesome. The tent looked out on the fork of the Canning River we were on, and I got to wake up every morning and see Arctic loons or, tundra swans or whatever floating down the river. And sadly, never saw a bear the whole time I was there.
Yeah, it is. Once you're up there and you sort of get your bearings, you do want to see them. It's
Yeah, yeah,
less Alaska if you don't have the bears.
exactly. So my day would consist of we'd get up and put all our layers on, usually put on a set of waders and boots. Um, and we'd do these transects where I'd walk behind the biologists. They were looking for behavior. Um, if they found a nest, they'd stop, and I would stop, and we'd kind of figure out, okay, I got 20 minutes, and I'd sit down and sketch something. Um, it was tricky. A lot of the nest stuff is photographs because I don't want to be hovering over the nest sketching and keeping the parents off of the um, spot because if it's a cold, chilly day, those eggs can't be out too long, and the parents do take a little while to come back. They always do come back, but. Um, but there was awesome landscapes. There was one point where they were doing some nest stuff, and we stopped and took a break, and it was the Brooks Range in the background, and like a herd of a half dozen caribou sort of walking along the foreground, and a river, and just like all these just like epic scenes that you think about in your mind, and just quickly whip them out and at my little watercolor sketchbook, and all of it's pretty loose, but it was amazing. And I do work from photographs too, especially in scenarios where I'm trying to get um, sketches of birds and I don't want to disturb them and stuff. So oftentimes I'll do as much sketching as I can, take a couple photos or take some video, and then come back and sit down and say, okay, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? I'm a little bit of a perfectionist in that way. I want to see, the things about the anatomy that I missed while I was
Right.
watching, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Like where was the eye line? Where did it stop?
Yeah, yeah, because
Uh,
there's as much as even birds I know really well, I'll sketch them and I'll be like, what was I thinking there? Was that what it looked like, or was I just filling stuff in?
And so what camera do you use for your field shot?
Oh God. I have a Nikon D7500 with a 2 to 500 millimeter lens. It weighs like 6.5 pounds. It's like it's like a ball and chain. I wish I had a photographer following me around.
Exactly. We switched to after many, many years of Canons, then Leicas, then Canons again. We went to the Sony mirrorless, which are quite
Yeah.
a bit lighter.
Yeah, I made this big investment in this DSLR, and I think I wish I had waited a couple years and gotten a mirrorless. Maybe that'll happen some point, but
Yeah, they're a little fussy, so just do
yeah.
what you know. So we're the feature in the magazine is in the print version. This
Mhm.
it's now it's the volume two, number one issue. So we'll have featured your sketchbook pages and your
Cool.
art as well, and so we'll get to see that. But uh, maybe we can talk with you a little bit about when you're out in the field. What are you carrying besides a 6 pound camera?
It doesn't come all the time, but especially when I'm in the Arctic, a lot of the time. So I have what I can do a little show off. I have what is affectionately by my wife called my man purse, which is this like the satchel that's locally made by Anchor Pack, a guy I know, a good friend. Um, and it's great because it's sort of an arm satchel, and then you can sort of reach in and grab everything you need. You don't have to like bust with a backpack. So that's often my go-to sketch pad or sketch um, gear lugger, and then it's usually packed ready to go. So if I get a text that there's some cool bird somewhere, I just grab that and I'm ready ready to roll. Um, I use Stillman and Burn, the Series A, I think, sketch spiral bound sketchbook. It's the medium weight paper, which is nice because I like the way the Stillman and Burn holds watercolor. It for 50 sheet sketchbook, which is what I like because I like 25, doesn't last long enough for me.
Okay, yeah. How many do
I
you?
like to have a few extra pages. Um, and it's light enough paper that it takes a watercolor sketch really well. I often find myself fussing with it and overworking a little bit because it's that balance between wanting to have a nice watercolor thing, but then you gotta whatever. But you can feel good about doing just a pencil sketch and it's something loose and goofy and of the moment, and you don't. My last sketchbook before this was I decided to try one of the bound watercolor sketchbooks,
Mhm.
which was also fun, but I found myself wanting to do a full watercolor painting on every sheet because it was heavy, nice paper, and it
Uh,
was like that responsibility of doing more than maybe you needed to on it.
oh, I like that. That is a trigger, isn't it? When you have these big, beautiful, well-made sketchbooks with special
Yeah,
paper, that responsibility. I like that.
yeah, that's
Whereas
for better or worse.
the spiral Stillman,
Yeah,
easy to hold, flips back. You don't have to be as precious with it, and
yeah,
yet it takes enough of watercolor that you can do
yeah.
more complete.
I
pieces.
did like the bound one because I could open it up and I could go across the seam
Yes,
and
exactly.
do things which I can't really do with the bound one very
Yeah.
well.
And then not the spiral one, just it gets,
Yeah, yeah, the
yeah.
spiral one.
So, and what are you, you sketch with pencil? Do you,
Yep, I usually use black wing pencils.
okay.
So a friend of mine turned me on to these. This is my special edition Jerry Garcia black wing pencil.
Those are so fun. I've got a whole bunch of
I
them as
love them.
well. They're
Yeah,
so
that
high
was a great
quality.
worlds colliding thing. I'm a big Deadhead, so that was like I
Nice.
was so psyched to see a Jerry Garcia brand Blackwing. But yeah, so regularly used Blackwings. I have all kinds of different um sizes of them. Some of them are this long, some of them are full size. Um I usually use some sort of water barrel brush, and I've got a palette that is incredibly messy that has I'd say a dozen of my favorite Winsor Newton colors. Um, mostly, I have to say, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue are my go-tos, and that and a little bit of a um, yellow ochre for stuff. And but I have a full range of other things on there. I
Yes, and
like,
we'll take a look at that
yeah,
in the article, and what your preferred colors are,
yeah.
and water brush. Interesting. I would why water brush and not a traditional brush?
It's because I don't have to wrangle with the water.
Yeah, little water container
When I'm
balance.
field sketching, I do have a couple travel brushes that are in that kit. And if I have a chance to really sit down or if I need to do something fine. But oftentimes with the field sketch stuff, I'm just trying to slap some color down. I'm not trying to
Sure.
be too fussy with it. It'll the yeah, just not having to wrangle a source of water when I'm already juggling
Yeah,
sketchbook and
six
palette
pounds of
and
camera.
everything else. And yeah, exactly.
So in this issue, we're doing a review of 9 different water brushes because I
Oh,
started
cool.
seeing that there were a lot more on the market now than there were about 6 years ago. So I tested a bunch of them, and it was very interesting what won. I won't say
Oh,
here.
I'm very interested to see that because I all the ones that I have are pretty terrible, but they work for
Yeah,
what I want, but they're
and
not like,
it's interesting, but I'll say the most expensive name brand ones did not win. Um,
oh,
it's interesting. So you'll get a copy.
oh,
So let's see. We did your notebooks, your paints, anything else in your field kit that you really like that you would. How about binoculars? What are your go-to
yep.
binoculars?
I've got a pair of Zeiss Terras, Terra 50s, I think. Those are great. Those don't really live in my, they're separate because sometimes those go on trips without my sketchbook. One thing I do have that I really like is this doodad,
Oh
which
wow.
is
Okay.
my phone scope attachment that is specific. Phone scope with a K is a company that makes specific sort of phone scope gear for your scope and your phone. So I got this, and I usually might drag my scope along too, which was a COVID purchase. So
What did you end up with?
I
Curiosity.
got a nice Kowa scope. I can't remember
Yeah.
the power of it. It's one of the bigger ones.
And does that go on your artist in residence as well, or is that
Yes.
mostly for birdie? Oh,
That
very
well, that was after my artist in residence for Arctic was 2019, but I've been back several times since, and it's come to that. But I just got the phone scope fairly recently. I think I did some phone scoping of my last Arctic trip, but it'll come in handy this year when I go up to Tuluck. But it's great
That's
because I can
right.
take video.
When are you heading up to Tuluck? So Tuluck Lake, or Tuluck Research Station, is that the correct name? Is halfway up the Dalton Highway, basically between Fairbanks and Dead Horse or Prudhoe Bay, the end of the road. Um, I applied to that twice to that residence. So tell us about that when
I've
you.
applied many times and I actually didn't get the residence for that.
Oh,
But they do accept other artists there. And what I did was because you know, I'm a trained Maine master naturalist too. We didn't really bounce on that before, but that's like a year-long program in study of natural history in our state. And sort of that training really made me focus on all the connections of Arctic natural history and all the ways the plants and the hydrology and the birds and the mammals and all this stuff is interwoven. Um, that sort of started coming up in my field sketches, and it's like, all right, there's all kinds of cool stories here that can be told. Um, so in the midst of trying to put these stories together, I applied for this fellowship through the it's Drexel University, the Eckleberry Fellowship, and it is financing for artists to get out in the field and do field work, which is awesome.
No.
It's a great Don and Virginia Eckleberry were wildlife, especially bird artists. I think in the 70s, and as they passed on, they set up this fellowship for people.
Oh,
So I applied and got that fellowship to spend 2 weeks at Tulik Research Station studying Arctic ecology with a bunch of scientists doing global warming research and all kinds of stuff. So it'll be really neat, and I'll be sort of tagging along with them, sketching behind them as they do their work.
oh, fantastic. So tell us how telling stories is what we do. And that is unlike a photograph, an artist can be a bit more choosy about our what is in the frame, as it were. You
Yeah.
can add things, you can uh, really dive into that. Tell us why telling stories is important to you and what you hope to tell the world. How do you share that?
Well, I think, storytelling gives your field sketching and your artwork a purpose, a voice. I think for me, this is personal, but this is how I approach my work is that I want to be able to advocate for stuff. I want to be able to advocate for beings that can't advocate for themselves in places that people may not go to or may not, or parts of places that people may not understand or appreciate. So it can be anywhere from, showing people what lichens actually look like and what they do to, a beautiful herd of caribou walking across the coastal plain. Um, but I think as field artists, it's important, one, to give back to our source of inspiration. And two, I think more and more we're finding that places that we sketch and places that we love are under assault from various forces or can be. So if there's a way to take your sketching and your stories and have that advocate and be able to um, change minds and open up people's eyes about stuff. I was recently, Alaska Wilderness League brought me down to Washington, D.C. To talk to our congressional delegation about Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and I brought sketches. I brought 4 or 5 of my favorite sketches from Arctic Refuge, and I talked to our Senator Susan Collins, and she had no idea that birds migrated from South America to Arctic Refuge, some through Maine. So just the few minutes of making that connection, and maybe that will pay off. I'm hoping it will.
Wonderful. Yes, I meant to ask you about that. The last time we spoke, you were on your way. Uh,
Yeah.
Lobbying in Washington is a very
Yeah. Who would have thought?
well, it's a soul-destroying activity at times. But
Yeah.
your art must have been very, yeah, pay attention. People pay attention to art, and the effort that went into to getting that. It wasn't easy to sketch in the field and get those uh, all those mosquitoes. Yeah. So if you were to give advice to a an aspiring, I won't say young field artist because a lot of people turn to it later in life as well.
Yeah.
Once they've had families raised and careers, they turn back to what their passion was perhaps when they were younger. And so for a beginning field sketcher, what kind of what would you advise for how basically no basic how do you operate in the field as opposed to the safety of a studio where you've got a
Yeah.
photo and that bird isn't going to fly away to we talked about your favorite kit, but what advice would you give?
Yep. Um, God, the first piece of advice, and I every time I teach a nature journaling or bird drawing workshop, this is the first thing that comes out of my mouth is take your little inner critic and put it in a box.
Yeah.
let yourself go because drawing should be fun. It should be an activity that, you know, is just do it for the act of doing it. It's like the first time you pick up a guitar and try to strum something. You sound terrible. And your first drawings might be terrible too. But that's okay because the more you do, the better you get. And if you're outside and you're looking and focusing intently on something and you're exploring it through the act of drawing, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. You know, it's part of your experience. So and by the same token, the more you do, the better you get. So,
And
um,
there is no magic pill to instantly make you be able to
there
draw.
is no, and
Only
the,
thing is drawing. You gotta
yeah,
draw, draw.
yep, the you are so talented, every time I get that, I'm just like, it's a lot of pencil miles.
It
This
is.
is a magic skill I got out of the air.
So,
It's
and
something I
if
like
someone
to do
says,
enough.
"Well, I can never draw," you would
Yeah, oh,
say,
I get that all the time. And it's just like, would you have if you like it, just do it.
"You want to
So.
do it."
Yep. And
Just
and my other advice would be to pick something that's gonna stand still. I mean, I started field sketching at wildlife parks and zoos and stuff like that because you've got something that's moving, but if you pick your
can't
right
go all the way
or,
away.
yeah, maybe you don't do the fox that's running back and forth in front of the thing, but if there's an eagle sitting there just sort of peering, that'll sort of earn your chops that way. Or do some landscape stuff, or just go out in your backyard and find a cool plant you haven't seen before and sketch that.
Great advice. Great advice. And any advice for someone who's applying for artist in residence because you've
Yes.
had so much experience and you make it, telling us about it just sounds like, oh, I really want to do that. What advice would you give for
So
applicants?
research is my
Oh,
advice. So find out, you look at the place that you're applying to. Get on their social media, see what their mission statement is, see what kind of projects they have going on, and see how your specific skill set can apply to help them get the word out about their projects or to help them, in some way have other people understand that stuff. Um,
great
that's
advice.
that's what's worked for me. And yeah, that's key because everybody has a unique talent and it's a building process too. I found, it was step A, step B, C, and D before I got to do Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But
True.
um, yeah, and
But it's
there's
a
there's
little,
cool artist residencies in everybody's state.
there are
Um,
many, many,
yeah,
and it is frustrating at first. You'll find that it's a bit of catch 22 because they'll say, oh, well, we're looking for someone with experience who does
yeah,
this. It's like, but how do you get experience without getting chosen? So
exactly.
just persevere and
Yes, persevere is very important because except for the Baxter State Park one, yeah, the Alaska ones are all like, that was the third or fourth time I had applied before I got them.
good to
So,
know. Good to
thick
know.
skin.
Wonderful. Well, it's been delightful chatting with you, Michael. We really
You
appreciate your
too.
time today, and we'll looking forward to putting together your spread in the magazine for the field arts and your sketchbooks and your favorite kit. I think that's a really fun thing to see for those of us.
I'm looking forward to putting that together too.
Great. And oh, any so Tuluc Lake is coming up. Anything else on the horizon after that?
No, I'm pondering applying to a residency in Antarctica, but I have to talk to my wife and see if that's a possibility or
I
not.
know two people who have done Antarctic art residencies, and
Yep.
yeah, you should go for it.
Yeah.
Pretty,
I feel
pretty
like I should. I got to be careful my marriage doesn't fall apart.
definitely not.
He's incredibly patient, so
Wonderful to have that kind of support.
yes.
Well, again, thank you, and we will see you hopefully in the field and
Okay.
potentially at Hog Island in coming up at the Wild Wonder retreat. Are you going to be there?
I If only I was going to be there, they asked me, but I'm going to be in Alaska those dates. That was another residency I did as the Hog Island Artist Residency. I didn't even get to bring that one
Well,
up.
Alaska will be incredible, as you know. And
Yes, it
Tula
will.
is quite
Yeah.
different than the North Slope. It's nestled into the base of the Brooks Range foothill.
Oh, cool.
So
Well, looking forward to exploring it.
it's a wonderful space. All right. Thank you.
Oh, it's great talking to you, Roseanne.
Thanks, Michael. Bye-bye.